The gospel lesson you heard describes how Jesus began his ministry baptized by John in the wilderness. It looks like he's all poised to begin this wonderful ministry that we're so familiar with, and instead he takes a detour through the wilderness. And he's there for 40 days, 40 nights. Mark offers us some details here, how Mark describes it. Jesus was in the wilderness 40 days, tempted by Satan. That word, by the way, Satan, simply means adversary. In Scripture, both Old and New Testament, the word Satan is used to describe people and circumstances. So don't think of the guy with the pointed hat and red tail and pitchfork. Tempted by, literally it would be the Satan, by the circumstances or by the issues at hand. And he was with the wild beasts, and the angels waited on him. And then he leaves and starts preaching, begins collecting followers, performing miracles, and changing history. And the rest, as we know, is in fact history. Wait a minute. Back up a minute. One sentence to describe 40 days? You got to be kidding me. 40 days, and this is all Mark has to say about it? For crying out loud. No details of the temptations, no quotes of Scripture by Jesus. Surely there is more to this story than what is given to us by Mark. Where is the rest of it? That's what I wanted to know when I came to this text, saw that it was going to be the lesson for this Sunday, the first Sunday of Lent. And I wanted more. I wanted more details. I wanted more to wrestle with. I wanted more that I could listen to and share with you today. And Mark just doesn't give it. What gives? So I spent a little time just listening over and over, reading just this one verse. And I discovered that sometimes less can be more. Taking it word by word was like unlocking an overstuffed suitcase. You know, the kind that you release the lock and the thing springs open like a jack-in-the-box, and if you're not standing back from it, it will throw a hairdryer at you. There is so much packed into these few words of this one single verse, so I want to take some time to unpack it a little bit together. Back up just a minute. Dripping wet from his baptism, Jesus doesn't just wander off into the wilderness. The Spirit of God drives him there. Literally, it tosses him there. The Greek word there for drives or compels him or whatever your translation may have literally means, it's ekbalo, it's a ball to throw, ek meaning out, to throw out, to toss out. And that's what the Spirit does. It just pushes him, drives him, pushes him out into the wilderness, tosses him out there. And with the echo of God's voice still ringing in his ears, "You are my beloved child, with you I'm well pleased," he gets thrown into this chaos, which challenges what we thought we knew about ourselves, what we thought we could trust. This voice that says we're blessed. So if we're blessed, why is this difficulty happening to us? You ever ask that question? Like Jesus, we don't choose to go into the wilderness. We don't go looking for a struggle. We just get thrown into it, trip into it, get tossed into it. Thrown into it like our dad's throwing us into the deep end of the pool. You don't know how to swim? Here. And we start flailing about until finally our arms get some kind of motion and we in fact discover that we're swimming. But all the time it takes us the 10 minutes to get from the side of the pool to the edge of the pool and hold on, we feel like it's going to kill us. And that's what wilderness times do. That's the struggle of the wilderness, where everything kind of gets thrown up into doubt. We're not sure we're going to be safe. We're not sure of all the things that we most wanted. And we can strain and struggle for 40 days or 40 weeks or 40 years. But all the while, something's happening. We're getting tested. Don't hear that as just temptation, some kind of moral issue. To test means to be refined. It's the process that happens to steel when it is heated. We call it tempering. After steel has been tempered, it's much stronger. than it was before it went through the fire. We were watching the Olympics the other night, and gold medalist Scott Hamilton was talking about Nathan Chen, that marvelous skater who just in a couple of short programs, despite his inability, it seemed, in every other competition never to fall, fell almost every time he jumped. And then he came out on the ice in that long program, and for the first time an American nailed not just one quad. He did 5 of them, did 6 in all, but 5 of them flawless. And Scott Hamilton said he remembered that when he first began skating and he finally entered his first competition, he felt very good about it. He said he skated, and they got to the judges' score. He says, and I came in dead last. So I just was determined, and I entered my next competition, and I skated my heart out, and I came in dead last. Scott Hamilton stayed with it. In every failure, he inched higher and higher in the standings until in 1984, he skated into a gold medal. Because he'd been refined. He'd been tested. And the testing had produced a kind of endurance in him that caused him to excel at whatever he was doing. The wilderness is that in-between place between where we get where we know we can be and where we find ourselves versus where we used to be. It can be an awkward time, a frustrating time. It's the place that we have to pass through to get from one place to another. We don't like to go there, but there's no other way through it. There's no shortcuts. There's no end around that we can take it. We've got to go through the wilderness. And the endurance that we pick up from that wilderness, though, is what prepares us for whatever's coming next in our lives. Crises do that. A health scare, a financial crunch, a deadline that causes us to stop and think about what we're doing. I'd never write a sermon if I didn't have to preach it. I have a deadline every Sunday. And you'll see me up in the choir loft or out in the pew. I'm still scribbling because I'm still writing. I'm still editing. I could do that forever and never preach it. But at some point, you just have to stop. And you have to preach it. But what that does, that deadline forces me to remove the clutter, all the extraneous things, and get to the heart of stuff. I live with a professional organizer. Every now and then she walks into my office and just kind of, you let me know when you want help with this. She works with folks who are in a wilderness season. Because wilderness comes in seasons of our lives. She works with people who are getting ready to move, and suddenly they have the urgency to get their house in order so it can be staged, so it can be sold. Or else they've just moved. And all of that stuff that used to have its own place somewhere is now in a box and needs to reside in the new place to which they have moved. Or they simply want some help rethinking a space and bringing some organization to their workplace. We were talking about this yesterday, and she said she had worked with a client, and working in her kitchen, she had found 13 oven mitts. 13. Now, in the South, you might be a redneck but I'll tell you what, if you got 13 oven mitts in your kitchen, you might be a hoarder. So after meeting with a client and asking them what they're wanting to do and how they want their life to be in the space after their work together, she offers this caution. It's going to get worse before it gets better. In other words, all of the stuff that may seem like clutter now ain't nothing until we've pulled stuff out of the closets and out of the drawers that you've jammed in there. And we're going to have to get it all out in order to figure out where things can go back. You're going to have to make some room. But there's going to be more chaos before we can bring any organization to it. That's what the wilderness does. It brings all kinds of things out of us. Some of it useful, and some of it we decide we don't need it anymore because it's really not helping us. But without the crisis, you would never know what you really value, what's important enough to keep, and what is important enough to discard. The crisis will push us to make some choices and set priorities, which is why after the crisis, we can look back and say, that really changed my life. I wouldn't choose to do that ever again. But on this side of it, I'm a better person. I learned something. I became something better. It took me places that I would have never chosen to go. But now I'm glad I went. So as we're walking yesterday, I'm trying to think through my sermon at some point, and I'm asking Vicki some questions about her process. When she works with a client, what does she do? And she says that she always begins by asking a simple question. And it was a disarming question. It's not the kind of question that I expected a professional organizer to ask. Where do you want to go? Where do you want to go? That's a different way to think about your space. Because now you can begin to think about space as that which enables you to move somewhere, to flow in life, and that which inhibits you from doing that. One client whom she had brought in, Vicki, to help her kind of bring some organization to her house, a mother with several young children. And you expect, I need toys to be in a certain place, and I want my kitchen organized and all that. But this woman thought about Vicki's question, and her response was, I want to be a better mother. And she began to say that something about the way they were living, the clutter in her home, the organization of her home or lack thereof, she said she found it getting in the way more and more of the time that she was able to spend with her children, because all of that stuff was becoming a distraction. But when she asked herself the question, where do I want to go? What do I want to be? It wasn't just about organizing clothing and dishes and silverware. It had a much more important end result. I want to be a better mother to my children. And that goal, that understanding of where she was trying to get to, drove all of the decisions then around which they made in the organization project that they did at her home. Because she had somewhere else she wanted to be, and she had someone else in mind that she wanted to be. Where do you want to go? Who do you want to be? Jesus walked away from his baptism with a powerful understanding of himself. Now, where did he want to be on the other side of that wilderness? After that's been tested, how does he want to bring that into the work that he will do beyond the wilderness? What kind of person does he want to be? I've mentioned before that I do some coaching. One of my clients that I've been coaching for about 5 months now came to me because they were an entrepreneur and they were getting ready to start a new business, wrestling with the decision of whether or not to go all in and start this new business or continue with the existing small business that she already had. So in one of my earliest calls with her, I said, let's take a trip. Let's go down to the mall, and I want you to stand in front of that marquee, and you're right there in the center of the mall. And if option one, staying with the business that you're currently doing, is your goal, take me down to that end of the mall and describe what you do and who's there. And so she, in her mind, started walking me down. This is what I do. These are the kind of clients I work with. And she described what it is that she does in working with them out of her home. I said, now take me to the other end of the mall. This new possibility that you're thinking about. And so she turned and she started walking toward the other end. And the more she got there, I listened, and her voice, the pace of her words started to pick up. And when she described what was happening, it was night and day different. And I said, so what's different about this end of the mall than that end? And she thought about it for a minute, and she said, there are people in my store at this end. And I was the only one in the store at the other. And it was this aha moment. The work that she was very effective at, very successful at in one respect, also was very isolating. But the new venture that she was considering brought some of those skills to bear in this setting that would allow her to have almost daily interaction with people. And she loves working with people. The best part of her work at the other end of the mall was the initial one-on-one meeting she has with the client. And then after she does the work for the client, the meeting that they have at the end. And I said, so which place do you want to spend the most time at? And I could hear her smile through the phone. I'm turning left. She had a clear understanding of where she wanted to be and who she wanted to be in that other place. This season of Lent invites us to join Jesus in the wilderness because by now you have made and broken all of your New Year's resolutions. So now you can stop playing that game. Where do you want to go in the rest of this year? Who do you want to be in the rest of this year? You're free to ask some new questions, to listen for the answers with Jesus in the wilderness without any distractions, clearing the clutter. It leads naturally to the next question, Vicky says. What's in your way? What's preventing your home or your office from helping you get to the place that you want to be? Mark tells us Jesus wasn't alone in the wilderness. There were wild beasts there, lions and tigers and bears. That's right. So about a week and a half, 2 weeks ago, Vicki and I were trying to walk almost every single day down to the park around 3 to 4 miles, and she was not with me that day, so I'd gone and done a really hard power walk, and as I'm coming back down Glen Cove, I look out, and about as far away as the back doors are from me right now, stood a dog I had never seen before. And I'm not talking about a Chihuahua, I'm talking about a large dog, and he looked hungry. Or hangry, as the case may be, and he was sizing me up to see how many meals he might be able to get out of me. And I just stopped, and we kind of stood at, and he was, you could see his muscles were all tense, and he was ready to come running at me. And so I paused for a little bit and thought about where else I could live. And I just quietly walked across the side of the road, and then he started coming up the sidewalk to where I had been. Now, crises make you look around, and I'm looking for a stick because I thought he might want to play fetch. So I'm looking for the largest stick because we've just had some storms, and there are lots of sticks on the ground, none of which are large enough to protect me. But I am walking and going across almost into the field there on the right-hand side of Glen Cove. And he looks me over, and we kind of eye each other, and I keep going. And then he starts coming down the sidewalk. And I thought, I know I can't outrun this guy. I mean, it was really unnerving for about 4 or 5 minutes. It's a long 4 or 5 minutes. And finally, he just stopped and he went to look for a child or something, I think. So, and I was ready to find one and give it to him. So, wild beasts can get in the way of where we're trying to go. They can even prevent us from getting there altogether. But sometimes the wild beasts aren't outside of us, they're in us. And in the wilderness, in the times of testing, they'll come out. Vicky has learned that people, when you're messing with their personal items, all kinds of things come out. We used to joke that when we first got married, most of the things that I owned ended up in Goodwill. Wasn't quite sure that was fair, but anyway, people get emotional about change, right? Moving personal items can turn a relatively nice lapdog into a howling banshee. It is hard to part with favorite items. We put them out into the garage sale and then turn around and go back and buy them from ourselves. Vicky said, I have learned that every item has a story. That those items are linked to places and to people in that person's life, and I have to treat both the item and the person and the memory with respect. Our own wilderness experiences will make us ask some tough questions of ourselves. We may be holding on to some things. We think they're priceless. And because of what they represent, the pain that may have come to us, it is hard to let go of a grudge, or a hurt, or a fear, or a hang-up. Like a wild beast, we don't know how to leave it alone. We can treat those things with respect, though. We can name them for what they are. But we can also decide that we're not going to let them stand in our path anymore. That we're going to find a way to get around them. Not to pretend that they're not there, but to decide that the other side of where that beast now stands is a better place to be than immobilized where we now stand because of it. What are the beasts that you're facing? What's challenging you or threatening you? Maybe part of what we do every single week is learning how to trust each other to tame some of those beasts and to help us find our way around it so that we don't have to be afraid of them anymore. Of course, much of what Vicky does with a client is simply reorganizing or repurposing. Her motto is simply, make your space work for you. So she thinks about the flow of a kitchen and how to access cooking utensils and pots and pans after she's listened to the person describe their family routine and how often they use the kitchen and for what purposes. Whether the pots and pans and all those things are for decorations because they make reservations mostly as opposed to meals, or whether they actually need those things. And sometimes a client finds the simplest of solutions in things that they just hadn't thought about because in the busyness, we just don't think about what we're doing all the time. And so she'll say, what if you kept the trash liners for your garbage can that's under your sink? What if you kept it right next to the garbage can under the sink? Because I've watched you now, every time we've cleaned something out and thrown it away, you've made 4 trips out to the garage, to the shelf, to get a trash liner for the garbage can that's in your kitchen. I hadn't thought of that. Or putting the coffee cups above the coffee pot and the filters in the drawer below the coffee pot. Seems like a no-brainer. But sometimes it's until we really are forced to wrestle with those things, we don't know how to repurpose things. We don't know how to rethink them. In a clothes closet, she'll give a client, she'll say, here's what you're going to do. You're going to pull out every stitch of clothing that's in that closet. You know, they're always jammed in there. And she pulls them out. You lay them on the bed and on the floor. And it's like, oh, I wondered where that blouse went. And they discover things that they'd forgotten about. And she says, let's group them now. What works best for you? Do you need to group them by color? But one of the smart things she's done is she finds coordinates and she groups them by outfit so that it's a one-stop shop. The person's not looking for slacks or dress pants and a shirt or a blouse in different places of the closet. The outfit's right there together and it makes sense. Seems like a small efficiency kind of thing, but it's amazing what it does to help the client pull life together in a simpler way. Or she's repurposed a piece of furniture, brought it into a room when it was in another one, and suddenly the client sees that there's a whole new value to this piece of furniture that they've always loved, but they've never used. And she helps them find a new purpose. Mark says Jesus found angels in the desert too. Messengers of hope and help. He puts the beasts and the angels in the same sentence because crises will bring both of those things to the surface. And that's when we get to choose which of these things do we want to keep, which blesses us and empowers us, which inhibits us. And she helps clients make decisions so that they have fewer beasts and more angels. My mom collected angels for as long as I can remember. She collected angels, one a year, usually at Christmas. She had a curio in her house that was jammed full of angels, 4 or 5 shelves, just all different kinds, sizes, shapes, colors. When she thought she was going to move, 7 years, 8 years before she did, she packed all those angels up, and her curio stood in her living room empty for all that time, afraid to unpack them. When we moved her into assisted living, we spent a couple of weeks unpacking a box at a time and unwrapping the angels, and it was like Christmas. I didn't remember I have that angel. I didn't remember. Where did I get that? Well, Mom, it's your box. It was in your garage. And one by one, we unwrapped every single one of those angels. Put them on the shelf at her curio. It was the one item in her room that we left the light on all the time when she was dying. And I would sometimes just ask her, "You see your angels, Mom?" She lived also with a lot of beasts. But in the end, the angels won out. You see, those few simple words that Mark tells us really do have a lot in them. And I don't know about you, but when I'm in a crisis, I just don't need a lot of words. I don't need to know what Satan said to Jesus. I don't need to know the scriptures that Jesus used to quote back at him. I don't need to know all those details, because Mark tells me enough of what I already know. I'm in a wilderness, and there are things that threaten me, and there are things that help me. And because Jesus has survived the wilderness, He's with me too. And He's with you. It's why we can do all things through Christ, who strengthens us. May you discover that to be so. Amen.